Using Kuretake paints again today in purple, green and mauve, just making some bands of colour across the page, adding some more colour underneath, letting the colours mix as you go, varying the size of lines and making some squiggly kind of shapes with just the tip of the brush. The brush size I've got here is a size 11. And I'm using various amounts of pressure to make different patterns, using the side of the brush here to make these lovely petal kind of shapes, and then using just the end to make thinner bands of colour. Again, the side of the brush is being used here to make these lovely wave shapes. I'm leaving some gaps in between the paint blocks because I'm going to embellish with some pencils and pens once the painting has dried. I'm layering over the top while the paint is still wet underneath, just so that the paint can mix on the page. This is a wet on wet kind of technique, and then you need to just let the paint dry. Once it's dried on the page, then I've got some pencils, some colouring in pencils. These are metallic colouring in pencils, and I'm just embellishing in between some of the shapes and outlining others that I can see that's been made by the paint. Let the paint be your guide. You will have made marks within that paint, so just enhance those shapes by colouring in with the pencil, just so that they stand out a little bit more. Drawing in the negative space and then shading in some of the coloured paint blocks. This will just give the paint block a little bit more depth to it and just enhance what's already there. So just doing some little tiny circles in this negative space. This is so that you're not left with just a blank white page underneath. It offers some colouring, some kind of shading by just doing little circles or any marks you want to make. Again, enhancing some of the shapes that have come here with the paint, and then outlining these petal shapes here just with a yellowish kind of tinged pencil, and then circling in and colouring in just to deepen these circles here. The pencils I've chosen are the same colours as the paint I've already put down, just so that it has some adhesion, the painting, and then just filling in and shading in where I feel necessary, just to add a bit of interest really, and neaten off some of those lines that look a little bit rough from the paint. I'm just adding some little shading here, and because of the cold press watercolour paper, when you're actually shading in with pencil, it leaves a sort of mark on there, which is quite nice. And then I'm just putting these little circles on, draping them over and shading again in certain areas. This is just so easy to do. Anybody can do it with any level of skill. You've just got to get started really. Just get your paint, do some bands and then see where to go from there. It's just like colouring in when you were a kid, just adding a little bit of shading here and there, not worrying too much about it, just see what happens. Sometimes they turn out okay and other times they don't, but that's okay. It's sort of a learning process doing this kind of art. Got a gold metallic gel pen here and I just want to add a little bit of glitz to this picture. So just finding some areas here. So I've decided that these are leaves, and then just some shading to these shapes here. It just means that when the light hits this page, you'll see a little bit of shine coming from it. So it'll just look a little bit more luxe. Your painting will just look a little bit more expensive just with that little bit of glitz on it. So just finding these round shapes and making some marks on those because they were a little bit boring. They were just circles, so the gold gel pen just gives them a bit of interest. I've got some acrylic ink here and just dabbing some dots onto the page and just going with the flow, going across this purple band, and then with the gel pen adding some more detail while I'm waiting for that acrylic ink to dry. It does take a while to dry, that acrylic ink, you know, so you may want to get on doing other parts of your picture. You've just got to be careful that you don't get your hand in that acrylic ink and then transfer it to another part of your picture where you weren't expecting. So just adding some little circles there, and then just enhancing these lines, these draped lines that are across the page, just because they didn't have much detail to them. So I just thought, well, if I outline them, that might enhance them a little bit. So just doing that, trying to be steady. It's very, very difficult to get those exact, but I'm not worrying too much about it. Just going with the flow, just because I'm enjoying this experience. I hope you like this. If you like this, maybe you'd consider liking and subscribing, and maybe leaving a comment. Would love to hear from you, what you thought of this picture, whether you think you're going to do it, what colours you're going to use, asking questions, anything you want to put, I will come straight back to you. It would just be great to hear from you. This picture sort of reminds me of a landscape. I can sort of see trees in there and fields and flowers. I don't know about you, but what can you see? The lines that I'm putting here, that really reminds me of a ploughed field. So yeah, I really love doing these patterns. They're really good for the imagination. So the acrylic ink has dried now, and I've got a pencil and I'm just enhancing that. Just circling around that acrylic ink just so that it pops out, the goldness of that ink. Just finishing off there, and then just colouring in some dots. I had previously just put a line round but felt as though it wasn't bold enough, and so I've just completed some of those filling in. Just adding some shading here and there, just coming to the end of the shading in process, just making sure that I'm happy with what I see, and then just putting away the tape, just so that I can get to have a look at this. And then if I just move it around, you can see the ink under the lights and you can see the shimmer. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.